Can you share any data with us about people's habits? I mean, what have you learned that has surprised you in terms of what people listen to during COVID? Music versus podcasts? Has the balance shifted? Is it old favorites? Are they discovering new things? What have you gleaned from the data?
So a few things happen. In retrospect, several of them are predictable, but it was hard to know going in. So one thing that clearly happened that isn't that surprising when you think about it is we saw our mobile usage drop quite significantly. And so why did that happen? Well, it turns out that a lot of the mobile usage is people listening in the cars, and people stopped driving. So they stopped listening on mobile. And then when we look closer at our data, and that looked pretty scary, but when we look closer at our data, we saw an almost inverse correlation in people listening on TVs and speakers because they were staying at home instead. So it turned out that in markets where we had a good penetration of our ubiquity program, meaning you can play Spotify on TVs and speakers and PlayStations and these things, the consumption basically just shifted from one device to another. Whereas in markets where we were much more mobile only, it was actually a dip in overall consumption for a while, right? So that taught us something about the reliance of being ubiquitous so that people can shift the same listening for a new situation. It had to work in the car, but then when you don't use the car, all of a sudden the living room is really important. Mm-hmm. And we were really good in both in some countries and not so good in both in other countries yet. And you could see that play out in the data. So that was important to us and an interesting learning. Then in terms of behavior, there were some other obvious things. We had invested heavily in products specific for the car again, something called Your Daily Drive, which was going really well, which is a personally programmed playlist with news and music in your taste as you drive to work. Obviously, that was a bad fit for a COVID world. So we pivoted and we created something called the Get Up, which is similar in hypothesis, but it's not focused around driving to work. So that's an example of how we adapted our product development. Now, in terms of listening habits, we do see some of these things where we certainly see more consumption on meditation content, sleep content. We can clearly see signs of anxiety in the world and how people try to alleviate that using music and using podcast.
Spotify is meant to be a discovery vehicle. How do you ensure that it's introducing people to things that they have never had exposure to?
Exactly. That's a great question. And there are two parts to this answer. One is the structure of the application and the user interface. So we try to build vehicles for discovery where you as a user can tell us, like, I'm in discovery mode. So for example, Discover Weekly. This is something you go to and you clearly show us that when I'm over here, I just want new stuff. Don't give me old stuff because it's called Discover Weekly. Release Radar. So we have these vehicles where you can self-select when you're in discovery mode. And then we have these other things. We have one thing literally called Time Capsule. And the whole point is that you're never surprised. This is supposed to be what you listen to in your teenage years, right? It'd be very weird if you were surprised by new music there. So one way is just the craft of producing different musical products for your different intents. Mm-hmm. And some people are in discovery mode some of the time and not in discovery mode other times. Some people we see in our data are just much more prone to discovery overall. They want to discover almost all the time. Some people don't. So we try to reflect that